In this lesson, we're going to talk about clauses. Now, clauses are really important because they form the building blocks of sentences. So earlier, you'll remember we talked about parts of speech, which were basically just words. Well, now we combine those words to form clauses. And clauses can be a sentence by themselves. For example, I exist. I exist is a subject plus a verb. I is a subject. It's a noun or a pronoun in this case. And of course, exist is the verb. Now that's a complete sentence, I exist. Okay, but of course you can join clauses together to form longer sentences. But in today's lesson, we're focusing on making sure we understand how you can make one clause. So here are 3 examples of very similar sentences, but they all contain the word John at the beginning, which is the subject of these particular clauses. John is followed by eats, and eats is the verb. John's action is to eat. So John eats, subject verb. John eats an apple. John eats an apple in his room. These are all complete clauses. Now you can ignore the stuff that comes after a verb, right? It's the object of the verb here. Okay, so as long as the meaning makes sense, it doesn't really affect the structure of the clause so much. We only care about the subject and the verb. So if these are 3 examples of perfectly good clauses, these would be 3 examples of fragments. Fragments are when you don't have a complete clause. Now, in these 3 cases, you can see that we have 3 subjects, John, 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 but there's no verb. Now, eating, if you remember from our previous lesson, or a couple lessons ago, eating is never a verb. It's either a participle or a gerund. But because eating is never a verb, these sentences lack verbs. So we never had to have a complete clause. So these are fragments and they are wrong sentences. Now, a lot of you may be saying, well, that's pretty obvious. If I look at the sentence, it doesn't sound right at all. Well, that may be the case, but as sentences get longer and harder, you'll find the College Board deliberately tries to trick you so that you don't notice these kind of situations as much. So here are a couple of other cases which are also fragments. Although we have subjects and verbs, you have to be careful to make sure that the verb actually matches up with that first subject. And in these 2 cases, you'll see that actually these verbs link to other words. It's Tom that eats, and it's who that is young. Okay, so of course who refers to John, but technically speaking, who is the subject for the verb is. Now, you may not be that familiar with these particular sentence types, but we'll learn about these in later lessons. We'll learn about this first sentence type in the very next lesson, and we'll learn about the who clause, or the relative pronoun, in the lesson on modifiers down the road. Okay, but the important point here is, hey, we never had a verb describing John directly. Similarly, this would be just a bad example because we have here John, he eats an apple, but we had 2 subjects again, John, he, and eats. Like, where does eats belong? Does it belong with he or John? I shouldn't have 2 subjects. I'm really flying through this part here because most of you will think this is pretty easy stuff, and you think to yourself, well, it just sounds wrong. I won't get this wrong. So that's fine. But remember, if you do start getting any of these problems wrong later, to come back and watch this lecture again. Okay. One point I do want to mention here is that you have to be careful of prepositions, because nouns that come after prepositions are never, ever, ever the subject of a clause. So look here, at home is relaxing. It doesn't sound too bad. It's not as egregious or as terrible as, John eating, but it is in fact wrong. You may ask yourself, well, wait a second, there's the noun, home, and there's the verb is, so isn't that correct? But just as I noted above, no, it's not correct because at is a preposition. And if you have a preposition, that means that home is not the subject of the sentence. Hence, this particular sentence is not a complete clause. It never had a subject for the verb is. How do you know whether a word's a preposition or not? Well, you either know or you don't. That's one way to think about it. Or another way is to test that word in different situations. So how would you ever use at in another sentence? I might say I'm at home, I'm at school, I met my friend at the mall. every single case I can think of requires that at has a noun after it. So that means it must be a preposition. Okay, so let's recap. A clause is the basic building block of a sentence, and it must have a subject and a verb. And make sure that the verb links to the subject that you are focusing on. Let's take a look at this very simple example. Dark energy, which causes the universe to expand, it has been present for most of the universe's history. Okay, so if you need to pause here to kind of think through what your answer choice would be or will be, and again, most of you will get this right without a problem, but it's not just about getting it right, you must understand why that answer choice is correct and the others are incorrect. All right, so if you have your answer ready, let's take a look at this. Dark energy. It's the first noun of the sentence, right? Energy in this case, because dark describes the energy. It's energy that's the subject here. Well, where's the verb for energy? Energy which causes. Hey, causes is a verb. Causes is a verb, but which? Which is just like who, except instead of for people, you apply to things. So which is the subject for causes, because who and which form new clauses. Okay, so that's not the verb for energy. So let's keep going. Which causes the universe to expand? It has, oh, there's a verb, has been present for most of the universe's history. Okay, so I have the verb, but in A, you can see that I have it in front of has. So if it is the noun for has, or the pronoun here, then there's never a verb for energy. So A is incorrect. Similarly, B must be incorrect. C must be incorrect. Because for all these verbs, has, had, has, we had a noun in front of it, or a pronoun in front of them. So they weren't, I didn't have a clear verb for the subject energy. That leaves me with D and E. And of course, we already found out, or we already know that having ing is never a verb, hence D must be the answer. Dark energy has been present for most of the universe's history. That is the correct answer, has. Okay, let's look at a slightly more difficult example. Pause it if you need to. Take a look at the sentence, pick the answer that you think is correct, and then explain to yourself why that is the correct answer. Besides publishing poetry for adults, Gary Soto, who is writing numerous collections of short stories and novels for children. Well, besides publishing poetry for adults, look, I mean, you may not be able to break down this particular phrase yet, so I'll do it for you, but don't stress out if you can't do it. It'll come with time, but besides is an adverb. Publishing here is a participle. What's he publishing? He's publishing poetry. For who? For adults. So adverb, and then I have a participle phrase here, right? A phrase. What does that mean? What am I talking about? Well, basically I'm trying to explain that this isn't the subject because it's describing something, right? There was never a noun here that acted as a subject because although there are two nouns, poetry and adults, well, poetry belonged to the participle publishing. It was describing what he's publishing poetry. Adults came after preposition, for, so I know that's not the subject. So nothing here was the subject. But, you know, you might say to yourself, I can't do that kind of analysis. I'm not that familiar with grammar yet. Don't stress. An easy way to think of it is, look, publishing poetry is describing somebody or something, right? So if it's describing somebody or something, it's not the subject. Okay, it's a modifier. It's describing something. This whole thing acts kind of as an adjective, or in this case, an adverbial phrase, because I'm saying besides or in addition to doing this. But again, don't worry about all the grammar terms I'm saying. Not a big deal. Just, hey, nothing here is a subject because it's describing something. So if that's the case, then what's the subject? Oh, Gary Soto. That's describing Gary Soto, who is the subject. So Gary Soto is my subject. So if that's the case, where's my verb? I don't see any verbs here. Oh, there's it is. A says who is writing, but of course we know that is, if that's the verb, who is the subject. So we're going to cross off A. Let's look at B. Nope, no verbs there. C. No verbs there. D. Oh, there's a verb, has. So maybe that's okay. E. Nope, no verbs there. So actually, if we got rid of all the grammatically incorrect answers, I'm only left with D as a possible choice because D is the only answer choice which gave me a verb for the subject Gary Soto. Okay. Last one. Last example here. A bit trickier. A lot of people get this question wrong. So let's look at it. A great grey owl flying low across a forest clearing, its wings beating quietly and its ultra-sensitive ears tuned to the faint sounds made by small creatures concealed under leaves. Holy cow, it's a long sentence. Well, I'm telling you right now that there's an error in the sentence, and it's to do with fragments and clauses, right? Right now, if you were to read this, you should be able to tell that it's a fragment. So take your time, pause, and try to understand why it's a fragment. And when you're ready, resume and I'll explain this particular sentence. So if I start from the beginning, a great grey owl. Well, there's my first noun, owl. It's probably my subject here, right? Owl is the subject. Well, where's my verb? Flying low across the forest clearing, no verbs there. Its wings beating quietly, no verbs there. And its ultra-sensitive ears tuned to the faint sounds. Is tuned a verb here? Well, I know I can tune things. I tuned my car, I tuned the TV to that station or the radio to that station. So it can be a verb, the past tense of the verb tune. But you have to ask yourself, is it a verb or is it a participle? Because it could also be the past participle here. And the easy test is that word or the noun that's before it, is it doing the action? Is it actually tuning something? Or is it describing that word? So are the ears tuned to something? Is tuned to describing the ears? The TV tuned to CNN is blaring loudly, right? In that sentence, tuned wasn't a verb. It was describing the TV. It's tuned to CNN. The verb was is. The TV is blaring loudly. In the same way here, the ears aren't actually tuning anything, right? They're not changing the channel or doing anything like that. We're describing the ears as being tuned to the sounds, right? Instead of being tuned to CNN, they're tuned to the sounds. So the easy way to test that is just ask yourself, hey, if I insert before the word tuned or any other potential participle, if I insert the words that are or that is in front of them, if I can insert that and that makes more sense, then that means it's a participle. So let's check that. It's ultra-sensitive ears that are tuned to the faint sounds. Oh, okay. That makes sense. It's describing the ears that are tuned. Hence, tuned here is a participle. Okay? So it's ultra-sensitive ears that are tuned to the faint sounds. Same thing here. The sounds that are made by. So again, make is not a verb. The sounds aren't making anything. Nope. It's the sounds that are made by small creatures that are concealed under leaves. So tuned, made, concealed, they all look like past tense verbs. But actually, I can put that are in front of all of them. They're not verbs. Tuned describes the ears. Made describes the sounds that are made by small creatures that are concealed under leaves. So I never had a verb in this sentence. Where can I put a verb that would make the most sense and not cause any grammatical issues? It has to be A. A great grey owl flying low across a forest clearing should become perhaps flew low or flies low. Either way, it doesn't matter. But I need a verb here, right? I need a verb here. So now I know that the owl flew across a forest clearing. The rest of the stuff in the back is just a modifier. It's just describing the owl, okay? Again, if you're not really that confident with modifiers, we'll get to that later on. But the important thing here is, what did the great owl do? Well, there was no way for me to fix this sentence except for to make A a verb. Because if I fixed B and said its wings beat quietly, I would have had a problem where I had the owl as a subject and the wings as a subject, right? So I would still never have a verb for owl. So the only place to fix this sentence here in this case was in A. Here's another example. Let's take a look at this clause up here. Because philosophy, now philosophy is the subject here, philosophy teaching students not what to think, but how to think. The age-old discipline, there's a subject. Offers, there's a verb, consistently useful tools for academic and professional achievement. Now, because there was a because here, it's a conjunction, I expected two clauses. I'm going to explain this in the next lesson where we talk about joining clauses. But for now, you know that the second clause here, discipline offers, is attached to that first clause because joins two clauses. But in my first clause, I had a subject, philosophy. But where's the verb for philosophy? What does philosophy do? Teaching, if you remember, is not a verb. It's either a gerund, a noun, or a participle, an adjective. So there's no verb for what philosophy does in the current answer choice. Similarly, see is an infinitive, to teach. It's not a verb. And D, you can see, also has no verb. It's teaching. So the only possible answer is teaches. Teaches is a verb. Philosophy teaches students. Subject, verb. So B is the answer there.